Side Hustle Show 151, How to Quit Your Job in the Next 6 Months.
Welcome to the Side Hustle Show, where aspiring part-time entrepreneurs learn how to turn their side hustle dreams into reality. Because your 9 to 5 may make you a living, but your 5 to 9 makes you alive. And now, your host, Nick Loper.
What's up? Nick Loper here. Welcome to the Side Hustle Show, where building multiple income streams is our jam. Today, it's about setting yourself up to quit your job in 6 months. Now, according to my guest, that involves four distinct steps. Number 1, seeing your job in a different light. Number 2, crunching your numbers or your expenses. How much do you really need to make this a reality? Number 3, finding people who will pay you, and we'll get into some fun strategies for that. And number 4, making sales, where my guest has some interesting insight to share on that front as well. I'm excited to introduce Abella to the program. She's a blogger, a freelance writer, a PR professional, almost by accident, and a coach. And she started to take her side hustles seriously in 2013 and was able to walk away from her job 6 months later. You can find out more about Amanda at amandaabella.com. And of course, all the notes and links from this episode are at sidehustlenation.com/151. Now, while you're there, be sure to grab the free downloadable PDF with all the highlights and Amanda's top tips from the call. Ready? Let's roll. Amanda, welcome to the Side Hustle Show.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, Side Hustle Nation is excited to hear from you, and thank you for joining me. This is a conversation about how to quit your job in 6 months. Now, last year we had Brian Harris on, who gave us a 5-step process to quit your job in 12 months, and so now we're going to accelerate that process a little bit. Curious how you made this happen, what the business behind that was, and maybe if there's some replicable takeaways for Side Hustle Nation to make the same thing happen. So take us back in time. What did you do? How did you get this done?
All right. So I guess the story starts at the end of 2012. By that point, I had been blogging with this blog called Grad Meets World, which I'd started 2 years prior. As a result of, being a millennial and having to deal with financial issues and basically just trying to teach people how to teach myself how to be an adult. And I'd always been telling people, I'm going to start a business. I'm going to do it. I have a following. That's what I'm doing. I run a side business. I have a side hustle. I've been saying that for like 2 years.
It was like a hobby blog.
Yeah, but the reality, and I was making some money here and there because like opportunities would show up, right? And I would take them. But if I'm being totally honest, it wasn't like a super viable business. I was maybe making, $300, $400 a month on my own.
And what were you doing to earn that?
Mostly writing, right? And then that was also the same year that people started approaching me for coaching because they're like, hey, you've been able to build this following. Can you teach me how to blog? And I was like,
in 2012.
Yeah. So I was like, yeah, sure. I could totally do that, and I would charge something like super cheap because I didn't really understand business, to be honest with you.
Okay.
I knew how to write and I knew how to communicate, but I didn't understand how to run a business. I was working as a recruiter at the time, and I kind of had this fork in the road, and I was like, okay, well, you can either quit this job and get a better job because you're a recruiter. You have a database of Fortune 500 companies in front of you every day. You could get one of these jobs so easily. You have an in.
Right.
But that kind of sounded like slowly dying for like 30 years. You know what I mean? By that point, I'd already kind of started making a little bit of money on my own, and I noticed there was an opportunity.
You'd had a taste.
I had a taste of it already, and I was like, oh hell no. That doesn't sound like a good idea. That sounds like dying a slow death. And the other option was 2013 is the year you quit your job. And at the time, I didn't know how I was going to make it happen. I didn't know what I needed to do. I just knew that I couldn't do it by myself anymore.
Okay, so Amanda's not starting completely from scratch here. She has been running her blog for a couple years. It's attracted a little bit of a readership, which has kind of led to some freelance writing gigs, a little bit of a side hustle income there. And also some of her readers have reached out and said, hey, can you help me out doing similar things? Like, I would like to have a blog myself. Now, when she said, hey, I can't go at this alone anymore, I asked her, okay, great, talking about kind of that entrepreneurial loneliness, that side hustle loneliness that some of us feel. I asked her what she did about that.
I hired my first business coach, There's this thing that says, when the student is ready, the teacher shows up. And that's definitely been the case in my business. So I hired her, put my money where my mouth was, got the biggest package she had. At the time, that was a lot of money for me.
How much did it cost?
It was only $1,000. But when you are underemployed and you came into the job market and went 6 months without a job because of the Great Recession, $1,000 is a lot of money.
That's a huge investment.
It's a huge investment, right? And at this point, I've spent way more than that in my business. But at the time, it was a really scary thing for me to do.
Yeah.
And I was just like, okay, let's just do it. Where do I sign the check? Like, I didn't even think twice about it.
Did you feel like you just needed that for accountability, or were you expecting like a step-by-step process to build a business? What was your expected outcome of the coaching arrangement?
It definitely wasn't like a accountability, because I was really good at getting stuff done. Like, I had spent 2012 working full-time, building a blog on the side, making some extra money. And I was also taking my life coaching certification at the time because, again, people kept approaching me about coaching. I was like, oh, I guess I got to get trained in this.
Okay.
So I was really good about accountability, and I was very responsible. So I think for me, it was just like, I'm really good at big picture stuff, especially back then. I was so good at big picture, and I was very good at abstract, and I was very good at motivating people and moving them into action. One of my challenges, even still to this day, is just like the really tactical stuff. Like, how do I figure out the money for this? Or how do I, build a sales funnel? I don't even know what that is. Or how do I even sell? How do I sell? So I think it was more the tactical stuff. Like, please, like, I know I've got something here. I just don't know how to put all the pieces together.
Yeah. I think a lot of people are kind of in that same position. So you're coming up, it's 2013. You say, this is the year I'm going to quit my job. You hire the coach, and what comes next?
I got on the phone with my coach and I said, we're going to make this happen in a year. She was, are you sure about that? And I was like, yes, a year. It has to happen in a year.
Okay.
And I was willing to do whatever it took, right? So I had to figure out my finances. I had to learn sales. I had to learn how to sell. And I had to stop hiding behind my computer screen and actually put myself out there. So if there's 3 things that you can do to quit your job in 6 months, it's those 3.
Okay. Well, let's talk about the finances part, because I think that's the most intimidating part for most people. At least it was for me. It's like, hey, how am I going to pay the rent? How am I going to put food on the table? Without this steady source of income. I wanted to have some sort of track record of earnings on the side before I made that leap. Was it the same for you? Did you have a specific income target you were trying to hit?
I was just trying to replace the income from my day job.
Okay.
Which on the one hand wasn't that much. Like I said, I was underemployed. But on the other hand, it was the most amount of money I'd ever made too. Right. So I was just like, you need to be able to replace this. It's really funny because I do a lot of coaching now, and people come up to me and they say, I want to quit my job in the next year. And I said, okay, cool. Well, the first thing I ask them is, how much money do you have to make in order to make that happen? Mm-hmm. Right? And no one likes to look at the money. No one likes to look at the numbers. And another thing that happens, I know I avoided it for so long because I just didn't consider myself a math person. And another thing that ends up happening a lot is people overestimate how much money they actually need to make. So, for example, I had a client once and she was like, I want to quit my job in a year. And I said, how much do you need to make? She goes, I need to make $100,000 in the first year of my business. And I said, do you make $100,000 at your job right now? She goes, no. And I said, do you need $100,000 in order to actually live? Right? And she said, no. And I was like, so do you really need to make $100,000 the first year of your business? And she's like, no, I guess not. And then suddenly it's like a weight is lifted off her shoulders because she realizes that it's not as, it's more attainable than she thinks it is.
Okay, yeah.
And I'm really big on teaching people, I'm a finance blogger. So a lot of what I do is budgeting and all that kind of stuff. And now I love numbers because, business has forced me into it. But I genuinely love it. And I often tell people, like, it's so much easier to cut your expenses and then make that money than it is to assume you got to make 6 figures in the first year when you don't really understand what's going on financially. And then, once you got your expenses covered, you've cut the stuff, you've covered your expenses, then you can work on building upon that. But you don't have that stress of, I got to pay the credit card, or I got to pay this mortgage, or I got to pay for the car payment. You understand what I'm saying? So I'm really big on just having people really bring down those expenses, because it's so much easier that way. And there's so much less stress involved that way.
Yeah, exactly. Your fixed expenses are really the driving force behind your quitting your job, rather than like, well, you mentioned even, hey, I want to replace my salary, but it's like, well, I may not even need to get there if I don't need that much to live on, at least at the beginning.
I'm going to be honest with you. Like, I've been called cheap more than once. My friends think I'm crazy. I still haven't owned a car. I'm almost 28 years old. I have never owned a car. Right? And I can get around with public transit and Uber, and it's cheaper than owning a car. Or, I decided, even when I had a regular job, I decided to stay living in my parents' house so I could throw as much money as possible into my business without having to worry about like the sky-high rents that we were seeing in Miami.
Right.
Right? So I'm not big on making sacrifices per se. I think the word sacrifice is a drag. And I think that's one of the reasons people avoid finances, is because they think it involves a lot of sacrifice. I am more about, you need to make conscious choices in order to get to where you want to be.
Okay, that's a good reframing of sacrifices. I was just going to say, it sounds like you're making some sacrifices there. But no, that makes sense. So where did so you had the blog, people were finding you through there for sounds like some freelance writing, and then some one-on-one, hey, how do I build a blog type of coaching services? Is that where the revenue came from to get this done?
Yeah, I mean, it was mostly writing and coaching. And then when I was working with this coach, she whipped me into shape. And let me tell you, within 6 months, I had my branding, sales funnel, and I had done my first in-person event where I got clients from that.
Oh, wow.
Actually, within the first 4 months, I was able to do that. And I rebranded my entire website and relaunched it as branding myself instead of this Grad Meets World thing. So some people are like, you're completely nuts. How did you get that done? And I'm like, you can get it done, right? It's a lot of work. But if you really want something bad enough, you're going to do whatever it takes.
Do you think it's feasible? Had you not started a couple years earlier to get something like that done in that time frame?
I was so clueless about how any of this stuff worked. And I was so resistant to investing in help, I should say. And I kept trying to reinvent the wheel. I was even to the extreme of like, who needs SEO and an email list? I'm just doing this, because if it makes money, cool. But, eventually it'll come to me. Right. Uh-huh. And I think that happens to a lot of people. It's like a build it and they will come kind of a thing. And I did experience that to a certain extent, but there was a cap to that.
What did you find was the most effective way to drive traffic and and turn that traffic into customers? So
for me, it's definitely been getting a lot of media mentions. I actually work with companies. I now collaborate with them to teach them. I went from individuals to companies, teaching them how to get more media mentions. So for example, I'm working very closely right now with a company called moneysavingpro.com. And I'm working on teaching them, okay, look, this is how you get more media mentions. This is the kind of content writers are looking for. And, we've been able to get quoted in, Time, Huffington Post, MSN Money. And they came to me and they're like, you were able to get more done in 2 months than like the 4 PR agencies we tried to hire before you.
Wow.
So that was a big part of it for me, was that I very naturally attracted media even before I knew what I was doing.
Why do you think that is?
Well, now I know why. It's because I have a very compelling story. It's because I'm myself, I'm very authentic. And it's because I know how to communicate. I have a message. It's not just me promoting myself. Like, I have stories. I know how to tell stories. And that's just always come very naturally to me. And, now I know how to pitch and all that kind of stuff. So for me, a big way of increasing that traffic was just figuring out, okay, why is media so attracted to me? Like, why does the Huffington Post want me to be on their live segment? Or like, why do people keep emailing me for quotes, and figuring out why that was?
So at this point, you might be thinking, wow, I wish I had half the self-confidence that Amanda does. But when it comes to getting press, having confidence in your story and presenting it in a compelling way can mean the difference between getting quoted and linked to or getting a thanks but no thanks. And I actually did an episode recently with Pete Walter. He's a PR pro from the UK. And on that call, he shares his 5-step system, his 5-step process for getting in contact with journalists and making a winning pitch, a compelling pitch. So I'm going to link that up in the show notes for this episode at sidehustlenation.com/151. But recognizing that the PR strategy can be a tricky one, especially if you're still working full time. So I asked Amanda, hey, what would happen if her boss saw her on Forbes or Huffington Post?
It was so interesting because I remember there was this one time, and it was during this time, right, where Huffington Post asked me to be on one of their live segments about having to move back home as an adult. And because, hot button issue for all the millennials, still is. I still get asked for quotes about that. But it was going to be at 1 o'clock in the 12:30, 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I would have been at my job. So I actually got my coworkers, and we split the office with another company, and I got all of them in on this so that they could man the phones for me while I got on Huffington Post on the iPad to be able to do this live segment from my job.
Nice.
I don't know if my boss knows that I did that. She probably does. I'll tell her at the Christmas party. She won't care now.
No, that's pretty. I mean, I've had people interview for this show, from their car on their lunch break, from their office with the door closed, all sorts of fun stuff. So that's pretty cool.
I do crazy stuff like that all the time. And actually, when my boss first hired me, I'd already started a blog. And she'd Googled me.
Right.
At the time, it was Grad Meets World. And of course, she Googled me. And she's like, hey, I saw your blog. You're talking about career and millennials. That's our main market here in this firm. You're hired. Okay. Basically.
Oh, okay. So, yeah, in that case, it definitely helped out. What's, so what did it cost people to hire you during those few months in early 2013? What was the main service offering at that point?
It was half and half between writing and coaching, to be honest with you. It was pretty half and half because I've always been finance nerd here. I've always been very big on having my money come from different places.
Okay.
So it was split pretty evenly between between writing and coaching at the time.
Were you going out and proactively pitching companies to write for them or going after freelance clients? How did that work?
I started going after more freelance clients, but I think more than anything was I stopped hiding behind a computer screen and I actually started putting myself out there. And I actually did my first speaking engagement during this time. I partnered up with the Label League. They're like a startup in New York for young millennial professional women. And they had these local chapters in different cities around the country. And they asked me to do a workshop for them. And I was like, yeah, cool, totally.
Okay.
I was like, oh my God, what did I just get myself into? I've never done this before. There's been a lot of that as I build my business. Oh my God, what did I just get myself into? Okay.
Were you bidding for jobs on Odesk or something? How were you going after freelance clients?
Yeah, definitely not Odesk. A lot of it actually came from referrals and networking. And that's actually also the year that I actually started going to conferences like WDS and FinCon. I'd never done this before.
Okay.
I was just hiding behind the computer thinking that somehow the money would come to me. So as soon as I stopped doing that and started putting myself out there, going to local events in my city, actually telling people what it is that I did.
Yeah.
It's so basic, right? So simple. Actually just sharing what it was that I was doing, then the money started coming in. And then, of course, the other side of that is I had to learn how to sell. I had to learn how to deal with objections oh, that's a lot of money, or let me think about it, or why should I hire you? Or I had to learn how to deal with that kind of stuff. I had to figure out my marketing and what the benefits were of working with me.
Yeah, that's something I still struggle with. Putting yourself out there is a little bit scary, especially when you're still working full time. But I kind of want to call attention to that. Even if you don't have this blog audience, letting people know what you're working on, what you can do is pretty powerful stuff. I always give the example of you probably have a bigger audience than you think, right? The average person has whatever the statistic is, 234 Facebook friends, right? Mm-hmm. It's that's an immediate network of 234 people plus everyone in their network. They're hey, if you make a quick post, hey guys, I do freelance writing on the side. All of a sudden, when someone comes up with an idea of oh, I need some help with that, or someone I know needs some help with that, that's kind of how these referrals can start to snowball. So I've definitely seen some examples of that. Quick question on the on that freedom number, on what made you comfortable to quit, had you successfully replaced your income, and was it recurring, or was it like, a 1 month thing and you're like, next month I'm going to have to go hustle for more clients? Or
by that time it was recurring. I had not yet replaced the income, but I was close.
Okay.
And I think everyone comes to this realization at some point, especially if you're looking to quit your job. I think everyone comes to that place where they're like, I could totally make more money if I just didn't have this job.
Yes, if I had an extra 40 or 50 hours a week, imagine what I could get done.
And by that time, I tried to quit at 4 months and my boss didn't let me. And then I ended up doing part-time for like 2 months. By that time, I felt comfortable because I had found my replacement. I had trained her. My best friend actually ended up taking that job. And I knew, looking at the numbers, I was like, oh my gosh, if I just have that extra 20 hours, if I didn't have to go to this office twice a week and then half a day on Friday, I could totally blow this out of the water. Mm-hmm. And the first month of doing it full time on my own, I made about $4,000, $5,000 more, which is a nice chunk of change for extra money. And then this year, I think I nearly doubled what I was making at a regular job. So it was really that. I just came to that realization of like, the only way I'm going to be able to make more money is if I just have more time to dedicate to this. And this job was totally in the way of that.
Yeah, I think you did it the smart way, and kind of getting yourself within striking distance of that number, and then saying, okay, here's the kind of the hurdle. That's the last hurdle that's standing in my way is this time.
Yeah, and remember, I had done the work to like really lower my expenses. Like I said, I went pretty extreme, of not falling into a trap of buying a car and getting myself into that debt. I was still living with family, so I wouldn't have to worry about paying like astronomical rent. I had no debt. I was paying my credit card balances in full each month. I had really gotten it together financially.
Yeah, not making sacrifices, making conscious choices.
Making conscious choices, right? And that's a very big difference from making sacrifices. And I kept remembering this quote, and I still say this quote sometimes when I'm like working on a Sunday because I want to go do something on Wednesday. And I still remember this quote sometimes. I don't know who says it, but it's the quote that goes, do what people will not do today so you can live the way that they can't tomorrow.
Yeah, absolutely. You're building your lifestyle business, and I love that. So tell me real quick about your sales process. What is it like when somebody reaches out to you and says, hey, Amanda, I'd like to hire you as a coach, although that's they've kind of made the buying decision. What happens if somebody first hears about it? Like, walk me through that funnel or that process.
Well, I'll walk you through what it was back then because it's kind of changed, and I think it changes as your business changes. And I think that maybe what I do now would not have worked if I was in a stage just trying to get as much business as I could, right? Like now I'm a lot more picky and I'm a lot more selective and I charge a lot more money and stuff like that, right? But when I was in that place of, wanting to quit in 6 months, the process was basically like someone either found my blog or they would meet me at events. And I was constantly just inviting people onto free consultations with me and free coaching calls. Okay. And if they were any good, then I would invite them to come on as a client, and I would have like these different packages. And honestly, I want to be very clear about something. Like, people feel like they need to have it all figured out in order to do this. I didn't have things figured out back then as much as I do now. You know what I mean? Like back then there was a lot of figuring stuff out as I went along.
I really like the language that you just used about, hey, I'm going to invite this person to be my client. I think this is going to be a good fit. I would like to invite you to work with me, rather than the other way around of like, oh man, I really need to make this deal. I really got to sign this person up.
Yeah, my coach taught me that. And also she recommended a book, which I recommend to everyone who's really just starting out, Book Yourself Solid by Michael Port.
Yes.
It's like a staple for this kind of a thing. And I recommend it to everyone. And I actually did the work. Like during this time, he's got that workbook that you can download for free. And I went in and did every single exercise. I was serious. Okay. Like I was real serious. I had really committed to this. And I think that's a big portion of it too, is if you want to quit your job, you got to commit to it.
Yeah, I think that's a great book for anyone in any sort of service business.
Yeah. So, I mean, back then, that's what it looked like. It was like constantly inviting people on the phone with me. And that was another aspect of not hiding behind a computer screen and just expecting things to fall into my lap.
Yeah. Well, like, if you don't mind sharing, what was a typical like closing rate for these free calls?
Oh man, I'm trying to see if I can remember that. That was a time in my business when I wasn't so good at keeping reports. I've gotten much better at it now.
Yeah, because personally, I do a lot of free calls, and I'm horrible at even trying to sell somebody on like a package because part of it's a confidence issue. Part of it is like, hey, if you're not making any money, like don't spend any money. Kind of a weird weird thing. I don't know.
Yeah, the same thing starts to happen when you start to outsource. It's that weird dance. Like, in order for me to make money, I need to spend more money, but in order for me to spend more money, I also got to be making money.
Yeah, it's a weird
dance, right? And it involves risk. You're right. I think a big part of it, though, was because I had done it myself and I knew what the value was. Like, I wasn't selling something I didn't believe in.
Yeah.
And people knew that I wasn't doing it just for the money. And honestly, like, I wasn't doing the coaching just for the money because I had money coming in the form of writing, too. It's not like I needed the coaching to pay my bills.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons I'm a really big fan of having the multiple streams of income. But honestly, I was closing at least 2 or 3 people a month back then.
Okay.
I can't even tell you how many free calls I did, though. But that was pretty much all I needed. And that was 2 or 3 people a month with very limited time available with which to do it.
Yeah. Okay. Fascinating business and very exciting to be able to get this done and turn it into a full-time thing. I just want to say thank you for joining me and for sharing kind of your story, your background, how you were able to get this done. I think it's pretty inspiring stuff. If people want to learn more about you, about your work, where should they go?
Well, I actually have a class. Everything we talked about today, I have a video class just for Side Hustle Nation. You can go to amandaabella.com/sidehustlenation, and you'll get videos about some of the stuff that we talked about today. And you'll also,
awesome.
And you'll also get like worksheets to help you crunch the numbers. It's so important that you crunch numbers. And you can get that totally for free at amandaabella.com/sidehustlenation. And of course, you'll be in the loop of like events and what I've got going on and new blog posts and all that kind of stuff.
Perfect. Well, thank you for that. Amanda, we'll wrap it up with your number one tip for Side Hustle Nation.
My number one tip, and this is based off of the fact that I avoided it for so long, crunch the numbers. And that could look like setting a budget. It could look like figuring out how much you need to make every month. It could look like, okay, well, how many people do I need to talk to in order to close X people in order to make X money? I think so many people, including myself, just avoid that. And it's a really big reality of what we have to deal with as business owners. And it's not as hard as people think it is. I think there's this misconception that, business finances need to be so difficult, right? And they're not difficult. They're just different from what we're used to.
Spoken like a true personal finance professional.
Yes.
No, I like it. It can either be empowering and say, "Hey, this actually isn't as big a nut to crack as I had feared," or you could be like, "Hey, maybe I need to make some, like you said, some conscious choices and reduce my monthly exposure there."
Yeah, and it's the same with anything in life. You need to make conscious choices. I tell people that all the time. You want to lose weight? Well, you got to make some conscious choices to lose weight. It's the same thing. It's the exact same thing. So
and you got to weigh, is it worth it or is it not worth it?
Yeah, you got to weigh, and same when you're making decisions, like why am I really doing this? What's the driving factor? For me, it was freedom from a job. I bet your audience can totally resonate with that.
Yes.
It was just having freedom. That's it. That's my main operating system is freedom. And in order to have that freedom, I had to make choices.
I'm with you 100%. Amanda, thanks so much. It's amandaabella.com/sidehustlenation, and we'll catch up with you soon.
Thanks for having me.
This episode is brought to you by Ting, T-I-N-G. Ting is mobile that makes sense. I'm 2 years deep into my experiment in switching from Verizon to Ting, and our average bill has gone from $125 a month to $51 and change. And that means I'm at least $1,700 richer because of making this move. Now, Amanda's number one tip was to crunch your numbers and be mindful of your expenses. And here's an easy way to do just that. Ting operates on the Sprint network, so you can bring any Sprint-enabled device, iPhones included, and keep your same phone number. You only pay for the text, minutes, and data that you use with no contract. So if you visit sidehustlenation.com/Ting, you're going to get a $25 credit towards your first month of service or toward a new device. Again, sidehustlenation.com/Ting for your free $25 sign-up credit. So what were the big takeaways from this call? For me, it was this. Number one, there's value in blogging, even if you don't see a business angle right away. There's value in that act of creation, in writing, in finding people who are interested in what you have to say, just like Amanda did in her side hustle path. Number two was getting out of your comfort zone and actually talking to people and letting them know how you can help, whether that was peers, blog readers, journalists, potential clients. Amanda saw huge leaps when, in her words, she stopped hiding behind the computer screen. So that's something that I'm definitely guilty of at times, and hope to take that advice to heart. Number three was making the sometimes scary investment in education and support to accelerate your journey. If I was to the point where I was making $300 a month in my side hustle and looked at a $1,000 coaching bill, that would be a scary proposition, and I probably would say I'm not at that level. But she took that leap of faith, and it looks like it paid off in a big way for her. So for the free PDF highlight reel from today's episode, visit sidehustlenation.com/151, and stay tuned tomorrow for a special Friday edition of the show where I'm talking about how you can get an edge in 2016 and beyond. Thank you guys so much for listening. Until next time, let's go out there, make something happen, and I'll catch you in the next edition of the Side Hustle Show. Hustle on.
Thanks for listening to The Side Hustle Show at www.sidehustlenation.com.